Welcome back. If you haven't been following me on social media, which I highly recommend you do if you're not, and I've included the links down below in this video description, I've been shooting a lot of motion picture recently. As I move into 2018 and start to look at other personal projects, I'm looking to try something other than self-publishing. I've done that for the last 3 years. I put out 12 publications, had some really great success with it and really enjoyed it, but I want to keep pushing what I'm able to do and what I am trying to do with my work. And so one of those things is looking beyond the still image and looking to the moving image, motion picture film. And I get a lot of questions about how much stuff costs and the basics of how stuff works. So I wanted to give a quick cost breakdown here. And I'm not gonna save that to the end of the video, we'll get right into it. There are really two amateur film formats which you can use. If you're interested, you've got Super 8, which is probably more common, and you've got 16mm or Super 16. Film format's the same. With Super 16, it depends on the camera. With Super 8 versus 8mm, it's the film cartridge itself. Looking at the basics, we're going to kind of assume here that you're shooting at the standard film speed. For Super 8, that's 18 frames per second. For 16mm, it's 24. Now, obviously, you can push that and get double your film with Super 8 by going down to 9 frames per second, or you can do the same thing with 16mm and go down to 16 frames per second from 24. But for the purpose of this, let's just focus on those primary numbers. With Super 8, when you look at the cost of a film cartridge, plus developing and scanning, because I'm going to assume you're going to want it digitized here somehow, you get 3.5 minutes at 18 frames per second on one of these cartridges. They're 15 feet long. Now, all said and done, you're on average going to be looking between $75 and $90 to do all of that with this 3.5 minutes, which means that each minute of footage is going to cost you somewhere in the realm of $25 to $30. It's not exactly cheap, but that's about what you're looking for. Now, obviously, you can do some things to move that, whether you're using cheaper scanning methods, whether you buy your own scanner, or whether you're processing at home. You can really look into getting the cost down. 16mm, understandably, is more expensive. It comes not in daylight cartridges like this, but on a daylight reel. Daylight reel, however, does not mean you can swap it like you can with the Super 8. Once you put it in the camera, you're locked in. It's 100 feet long. Generally, the film will cost about $10 more per roll. For example, this is the same film stock Tri-X Kodak 7266. This guy's going to cost you about 36 bucks, whereas this one's about 26. Processing is roughly the same though. Scanning is going to be a little bit more expensive. So all said and done, with this 16mm, you're going to be looking in the range of $90 to $100 for a standard film processing and telecine without any really high resolution. This is usually, we're talking 1080p. So that means you're looking on the higher end of about $30 to $35 per minute with 16mm. If you're making a true motion picture, something where you have like a 6:1 shooting ratio, that is, you're filming about 6 minutes of footage for every one that you actually use, you can use that to kind of figure out what your costs are going to be. For a 10-minute short shot on 16mm, expect to spend about $700 to $800 just in terms of film processing and telecine costs. Now, thankfully, we can edit digitally here, and so we're not having to sit at the splicer and scan everything once we're all said and done. But like I said, there are certainly ways to bring your costs down. Now, one of the ones from the outset, which is going to only reduce the cost from the get-go, you won't see any residual savings, and it might actually end up costing you more in the long run just due to restrictions on what you're actually producing, is by buying a cheaper camera. I have a few different options here. I have a basic Canon Super 8 kind of consumer level camera. I have a pro level, this was the nicest Super 8 camera that Canon ever made, and then I have a Canon 16mm camera right here. And funny enough, the pro level Super 8 is excuse me, generally going to be the most expensive of the bunch, but you can expect to spend for one that's in good working condition about $75 for the base guy right here, and you do want to make sure that it works. For the pro level, anywhere from $400 up for one that's been serviced, one that's in known good working order, maybe comes with the wide-angle lens or a few other accessories, up to $800. And for this guy right here, anywhere from $300 to about $700. So seeing that right there, you see that you have about a 10 times price difference. And if the goal of your short film is to just get something out there, you can really buy the camera and all of your film processing and digitizing costs If you go with the cheap model, it'll come out to about the same as if you just buy a nice Pro model altogether. Now, let's say you want to reduce costs in other ways. Obviously, there's reducing your frame rate. Now, what that's going to obviously do is you're going to get a more jumpy film. And with the Super 8 especially, it's more noticeable. Once you get down to 9 frames per second, things are either going to move pretty fast. If you are running them at a normal speed, this is where you get that very nostalgic home movie style where people are jumping around all over the place. Or you're going to shoot at 18 frames per second and get something a little bit more smooth. But because when you're shooting Super 8, you're already at a lower frame rate of 18 frames per second versus 24, which most of us are used to, or even 30 or 60 as we get into high def. It's not something that I would recommend doing if you're looking at it for a larger project. If you're doing some just shooting around and having some fun and trying to get a feel for it, 9 frames per second might be the way to go because you'll get a lot of footage out of one cartridge, in the range of 7 minutes even. And of course that is being played back at 9 frames per second rather than playing it back at 18 where you get that fast motion I was talking about. With 16mm, you do have a little bit more leeway. You can go to the 16 frames per second and still kind of get away with it. It's obviously not going to look as good as 24 frames per second, and you don't get twice the length of the cartridge like you do with Super 8. You only get 30% more because you're going from 24 to 16 rather than 18 to 9. But all said and done, there are a lot of ways to reduce your costs. Another thing that you can really look into is buying a home telecine or home scanning machine. There's really only a few on the market. The cheapest one is going to be from Wolverine. It's about $300 up to $400 for the most recent 1080p model. Now that seems like a lot of money to start with, but when you consider that a lot of us are spending money on our regular scanners, or I don't know if you can see it over here, you have scanners like the Pacon, which will run you $1,000. It's not that bad, especially when you consider that each roll of film is going to cost you in the range of $25 to scan anyway. If you're shooting anything more than 16 cartridges of Super 8, you're going to get all of your money back. And if possibly you and some friends could go in on it, or you make a little bit of money back by scanning for other people, it's a good way to bring your costs down and end up paying for the machine itself. 16mm, unsurprisingly, being a more pro format, is harder to get a home scanner for. You can do it, but they're going to be around $1,300. But again, once you get a home scanner, regardless of format you're shooting, your final costs in terms of buying the cartridge, the processing, and the telecine get cut effectively by a third. And so that takes that initial $30 per minute cost we talked about at the beginning of the video and brings it down to $20 per minute. Still expensive, but much more manageable. Now there is one final area where you can reduce your costs, and that's if you develop at home. I know that might seem a little bit scary. Motion picture film isn't something that many people have experience developing, and it can be difficult. However, if you accept some of the limitations that home developing can offer, once again you can bring your costs down even more, which gets you into the $10 per minute range with Super 8. Now, while I won't get into the intricacies of it all here, I will say that Super 8 developing and 16mm developing, as long as you stick with black and white, can be pretty easy. All you're doing is sloshing it around a D76 using the same stop and fixer that you're used to with still film. The only difference is that you're either doing it in a large, say, 5-gallon bucket like you'd find at Home Depot or another home supply store, or you're doing it in one of the large 3-wheel or more Patterson tanks. Now, if you use a Patterson tank and you're just shoving the film in there, which I've done before, you're not going to get the quality, understandably, that you would if you're using the bucket and just kind of moving everything around and letting it flow freely. Reason being, as the film sticks together, you will see some imperfections, you'll see more scratches. But if you're not super concerned about it and the overall look is something that you want to just have to be able to get it into the computer and start working with it, or if you're testing a camera, it's a really good option. It should go, obviously, without saying that this is processing it as a negative. So if your intent is to project it, you won't be able to do that. But it's pretty easy once you get it digitized to invert it in the computer itself. So I know this was a really basic overview and a quick rundown of some of the costs and some of the ways that you can get it cheaper. I hope it helps you out. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please be sure to leave them in the comments below. I'd love to look at them before I start making some of these other videos. Be sure to follow me on social media, as I mentioned, and thanks for watching.